Hi and welcome. And I'd like to say it's really great seeing you, but I know you're there. My name is Cindy Prizio. I'm Executive Director of One Standard of Justice. I've been around the area of sexual offending and I guess restorative justice for a number of years now. And I'm so grateful for the men and women that I've met along the way. It's been quite a journey, and there's been a lot of ups and downs, let's say. First, I want to start off by thanking the people, the presenters in my life. We started this webinar series in January of 2021 with Dr. Carl Hansen. And then we kept going for about 6 months, took a break, came back in the fall, and then decided that it's very important in terms of educational and informational. And as Senator Winfield has said, that people think they know more than they really know. And we just want to spotlight on the facts. And so I want to thank Alissa Ackerman tonight, Moe Miller, Kevin Lynch. I want to thank Sam Diamond, who is my partner in crime in terms of putting these webinars on, and I couldn't do it without him. And I want to thank all the partners, the restorative justice partners that we've, I guess, collected along the way. And in particular is Friends of Restorative Justice, Washtenaw County, Michigan, who I modeled our group in Connecticut after, Restorative Justice, or Friends of Restorative Justice of Connecticut. And then, of course, ampersands. I do know that there's other, closed caption. I do know that there's other affiliates or organizations who would like to partner with us. And I'd like to hear from you. Please reach out. So I want to start off by saying, first of all, I had a good day. It was very relaxing. I was at the legislative office building. And then about 5 o'clock when I got home, I got sort of some news that made me down. But what I do want to tell you about is the first time I met Alissa Ackerman. There's a journalist friend named, he's a national journalist, Steve Yoder, who may be on this call tonight. And he was writing a blog. And I don't remember if it was this one blog or his blog was called The War on Sex Crime. And he sent out a 17-minute, he dubbed it a short video from a policy person, a forensic criminalist named Alissa Ackerman. And so I watched this short video and it was just so close to my heart because every belief we had, there's this expert telling us that that's how it is. So I quickly met Alissa by phone and we began a relationship until we met in person at ATSA's 2018 conference. And by the way, the 17-minute video, I showed it to a group of people and she received a standing ovation. When we got together at ATSA, we kind of said that we were like, instead of just talking about this stuff, why don't we just do it? And that's when we started the seeds of the first restorative justice conference here in Connecticut. And so I'm going to endorse a lot of people, starting with Steve Yoder. Then I went up to the MASOC MATSA conference in Marlborough, Mass. And Alissa and Jill Levinson and I drove back to Hartford for the weekend for this restorative justice conference. How do we make communities safer and sustain them? And that was a beautiful thing. So we're at the Cheesecake Factory on a Friday night. And I'm talking about really maybe from my own lived experience that, I was crazy. I've got a loved one that got caught up in this. And he you know, his friend, her family was kind of crazy. And I'm talking about all the craziness and all the emotions. And Jill tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Dear, that's called trauma." And so, you know, over the years, I've thought about trauma. And I know Dr. Levinson is now doing research on PTSD for secondary registrants, the family of people on the registry. And I know I've also learned from Jill Levinson about the adverse childhood experience scores. And the trauma, I started playing with it a bit because one thing, you know, and then I called it the war on sex crime or the war on sex. And I didn't remember that Steve Yoder had actually used that caption until I just went back recently to watch the video. But what I'm reminded of is that there are no winners in this war. There are only losers. And we're not able to heal, most of us, from the trauma. And the criminal legal system may be not the best place to try to heal. And I took a look at all the people who are harmed. And so, for example, not only the person who was harmed, the person who did harm, both sides of the families, people who identify as falsely accused and the investigation dropped. I know men who are just terrorized by what could have been in their lives. We also put people who identify as minor attracted people who are law-abiding citizens, and yet the stigma that we've placed on them terrorizes them. And then there, you know, David Prescott, I'm going to blast his name out. He said, what about the clinicians that go into institutions and residential treatment programs who see things, and there's a conundrum? Do they whistleblow or do they continue to try to service their clients? I talked to public defenders who couldn't take the adult side of this, the adult system. And so they went into the juvenile system where they saw that there were programs and services to help rehabilitate people and keep them from returning. So, you know, trauma is our common ground. And I'm hoping the healing from trauma can be the next common ground. And so I'm just looking at, I just want to talk about one or two more things. I know, Sam, time's almost. One of the things is that I wear a pin and it says "Bust the Stigma," and it's really from Planned Parenthood. But I think of the stigmatization of not only people who perpetrate offenses, but those who have been harmed sexually. And society's views, in my mind, don't help them, but we hurt them. People, again, think they know more than they really know. And I've seen comments in articles on rape victims where somebody will say, that person's better off dead. You can never come back from that. And then I'll see another comment from somebody who says, I am a rape victim. I did go through that, and I'm glad to be alive. So I just wanted to mention, you know, we have all stigmatization is, you know, we label people and we think we know who they are. And then the last thing is restorative justice. You know, I'd like to say we're in a movement, but this movement's been going for how many hundreds of years? And I don't know if anybody knows, here's my last endorsement, possibly tonight, the TV series Goliath. But I was watching it and this line came up and I just thought it was so befitting, because all of us, you know, many of us are climbing uphill in our social justice and criminal justice reforms and everybody who's on my trauma chart, quite frankly. And the African proverb is, if you think that something small can't make a difference, then you should put yourself in a room with some mosquitoes and you'll know they can. And I want to leave you with that because, you know, being an amplifier like I am, it's hard to keep your chin up, guys and girls. It's hard. And again, I'm grateful for all the people in my life who give me support every day. And Alissa, thank you. That's all you know, I adore you. And I'm just going to say before I turn over to Gary Winfield, Senator Winfield, who is with us for a short time tonight, I'm going to say, Alissa, this was the first anniversary of our webinar on restorative justice for sexual harm. And I'd like to invite you back next year for our second. And thanks everybody for being with us tonight. Gary?
Thank you, Cindy. So I'm not quite sure exactly what I should be doing here, but I guess I'll just go back and do something that I've done before, which is talk about my own experience and why it makes me concerned to do this work with Cindy, OSJ at some points, the Restorative Justice Group at some points. Because being in the legislature, and even before I was in the legislature, being someone who was in the advocacy world, when it comes to the way that we think about the people who we often give the title of victim, we often are talking about them in very monolithic ways, right? They are this thing or that thing, usually just this thing. But I know that the people who are in those categories are a lot of things. And so I've told this story on some of these seminars before about the experience I had of being a legislator sitting in the legislative office building, watching a hearing go on about people who were those who had been through a sexual assault. And this was as it pertained to the Catholic Church, and watching the people in the room have their experiences be discounted, and the harm that was being done in that room, and being a person who I think people will look at it and not necessarily see a victim, right, of the same type of experience, who had never talked about it, who had never said anything public about it, and had not even said anything in most places privately about it. Watching that, being cognizant of what I was seeing expressed on the faces of people, and knowing that I'm in a position, in some ways, a position of power, but in some ways a fragile position, because in order to do something in that moment, I would have to say something that I had never said. And one of the interesting things about what the people who were disrespecting the experience of the people who I was watching in the room was that they were making a point that this was about extending statute of limitations. They were making a point that if people hadn't come forward in all this time, and obviously what they say they experienced wasn't real, and that hit me deeply because at the time I was 36 years old or something like that. My experience happened around 7, 8, or 9 years old, right? So that's a decent period of time. And so what they were saying hit me deeply because I had never been public. And they were saying that if they hadn't been public, then obviously they were lying. And I realized that people aren't public for various reasons, right? There are multiple reasons. Mine had to do with my mother providing safety to me, except she didn't know that there was this thing in my life where she couldn't provide safety, right? And I felt like it would do harm to my mother to explain, to pull back the covers on the fact that harm had been done to me, and she thought she had always provided safety. Another part of it was that the woman that did what she did in terms of appearance looked very much like the types of women that I have been in relationships with in my life, and all kinds of things. I don't need to explain all of it, but there are multiple reasons. And just like there are multiple reasons for why people don't come forward, there are multiple things that people want if they're going to get relief out of these things. Some people do want the criminal justice system. Some people don't want that. They just want to find a way to live and live a full life. And that's what I wanted, right? It would have done me no good for the person who did what she did to go through all of the criminal legal system. What I was trying to figure out was, did I want that to happen since I am in relationship with people who look like this person? Was that something I wanted to happen? Of course, as a 7 or 8 year old, I didn't want anything, right? I wanted to be a child experiencing childhood. That's what I wanted. But in my mind, that's what I'm wrestling with. I wanted to know why it happened, right? So we talk about restorative justice, and that's the process of examining the harm, right? Along with the person who caused the harm and the person who was harmed, examining the harm together, determining what the repair is and if there's something that could be done, and having a certain level of accountability on the part of the person who caused the harm to help in doing some of the repair. And I didn't ever get that, but certainly with our system as it's set up, I'm not likely to have ever gotten that anyway, right? And so to me, this work becomes important because if we reduce everyone who we put into that category into victim to what they want is the legal system to come in and take this person and put them underneath the jail, then there are many people who we say we are helping that we further harm because we have kept them further away from getting the relief that they actually would be seeking. And so I'm thankful that Cindy, OSJ, the Restorative Justice Group, whichever version you're talking about, have engaged in this conversation, because there's too much misinformation out there, and that some of it's disinformation about who these people are, both the people who have harmed and the people who've experienced harm. And if we're going to have policy that is good for the people of the state of Connecticut, then certainly we have to at least know what we're talking about. So I'll end there, and hopefully I hit the target.
Before you go, and I asked Alissa if I could come on again first, just to tell you, I mean, I think, you know, I expressed it probably 100 different ways, that thank you, because you give me some sanity and hope and support and encouragement. And so it's not quite as lonely. Gary's been with us sponsoring these from the very beginning. So I'd have to say it's Senator Winfield, Sam, and I, and OSJ, the people behind the scenes. And I just have to tell you, thank you. So the other thing I want to mention is Alissa Ackerman and Gary and Carl Hansen just spoke with Dr. Danielle Cooper, who will be joining us again next month for the child sexual exploitation material, Men Who Access CSEM. Let's get the real facts. I forgot what we called it exactly, but that's taking place February 15th. But the webinar that just took place January 3rd, if you haven't heard it, I'm going to tell you, there was a lot of plain talking going on. There's a lot of good conversation, and it was straight talk. And I'd encourage everyone to go to onestandardofjustice.org or email me, and I'll get you the webinar. It's absolutely worth watching. Okay, Alissa, you're on. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Good evening, everybody. So I usually start these conversations by talking about the most important hug I ever received in my life. And this was a hug from a man who had served 20 years in prison for a violent rape that was very similar to the one that I experienced when I was 16 years old. And this happened at a treatment program where Dr. Jill Levinson is a treatment provider for people who have sexually harmed. And she asked me to come, but she wanted me to speak as Alissa, survivor of sexual violence, not Dr. Ackerman, the person who has studied sex crimes policy and practice for my career. So I said, of course. And I went, this treatment program is about 5 miles from where I was raped when I was 16. And I was, as you can imagine, terrified because I never took the opportunity to take down the shame wall that I had held my whole life. This was the first time that I was going to be really talking openly with anybody other than my therapist about my experience. The experience was life-changing. And what Jill and I, realized that we were doing was vicarious restorative justice. But after this session, this man came up to me and he asked me if he could give me a hug. And I threw my arms around him. And it was just such a powerful moment where we were able to humanize each other. And it's sort of an interesting thing because, you know, while I was experiencing this rape when I was 16, I remember thinking to myself, what happened to this man to make him think that behaving like this was okay? And so even as a 16-year-old kid, what I understood was that this was not just a choice that somebody made, that this came from some trauma, this came from socialization, this came from something other than him waking up that day and saying, I'm going to violently harm somebody. So I always kind of held that belief as I went through and ended up in college and in graduate school, and I still hold to that. But the important thing to know is that for 15 years of my career, I was completely silent about the fact that I had experienced sexual violence. I had gone into this field studying sexual harm, studying policy and practice, but never telling my colleagues, people who are world-renowned in the study of sexual harm. I refused to tell them because I was afraid that people would think that I couldn't do my job, that I was weak, that I was damaged, all of the things that Cindy was talking about at the beginning of the webinar. But I found my voice. I found my voice 15 years after the fact, and I credit that and the participating in restorative justice that has kind of put me on the path that I'm on now. And it is one that I'm really, really grateful to be on. I, like some of the survivors that Cindy talked about earlier, I'm very, very grateful that I am still alive, that I can be doing this work, and that I can bring, you know, some semblance of healing, or can facilitate healing for people who have experienced sexual harm and also those who have perpetrated it. So that's all I'm going to say about my story tonight. Many of you on these webinars have heard from me ad nauseum. So I want to turn it over to two very good friends of mine, Professor Moe Miller and Kevin Lynch, who is my co-founder and business partner at Ampersand's Restorative Justice. Moe and I teach in the same department at Cal State Fullerton, and I consider her to be one of my soul humans. So I'm going to turn it over to Moe first to kind of talk about how she got involved in restorative justice work, and then we'll turn it to Kevin. And then my hope is that Moe and Kevin will engage in conversation together, and I'll sprinkle in questions, and then we'll come to Q&A at the end.
Good evening, and soul human ditto. And Alissa knows that I love her dearly, and I really appreciate you, Alissa, for introducing me to the wonderful people who are now a part of my life and are, you know, coming in as I come into my fullness in this work. How did I get involved with the restorative justice piece? Well, the interesting thing about it is where I started to actually take a veil off and understand what I was doing. I have worked in the, as Alissa said, we work in the same department. We are criminal justice professors, but my expertise is juvenile justice. And it always has been juvenile justice, is because I felt like that's where I moved and grooved, you know, the most, and what I say for better, and meaning that I have been doing restorative justice work ever since I was about 16. Now, I didn't have a word for it. And the reason why I didn't have a word for it, because I didn't understand the experience that I had. And what I mean by that, my sexual trauma and abuse comes in as I started to get groomed at the age of 4. And that grooming throughout my life, right up to my first rape at 9, and then of course led to other sexual abuses from different community members, different family members, up until I was 16. And I think that's the first time that I fought back to, like, protect myself out of certain situations, and then actually use what I had learned, because it was a learning process, to actually survive houselessness as a teenager. So, but this particular work of restorative justice came into play as I was a juvenile hall corrections counselor. And what we were doing in that situation was taking juveniles who had committed violent crimes and hook them, well, not hook them up, that's the word we would use in juvenile hall. We would partner them with a mentor who would then reach out to their victim. And then that person, if they wanted to, would come in and talk to that juvenile about the harm that they had caused. This, for me, as a sexual assault survivor, I was helping with violent crimes, but in my mind was turning over, like, what could I, how can I take this to a level of sex crimes, right? Because I knew that I knew that I was a survivor. I actually knew that at 9, like when it happened, when the first rape happened, because of course sexual abuse happened after that. But I knew that I was a survivor, and even in my 9-year-old mind, I was thinking to myself, I have to figure out a way to not, help myself. How do I help myself from this reoccurring sexual abuse? So I preference to say to everyone that my work came into this because I am a survivor, and that I didn't have a sexual abuse encounter after my 21st birthday, right? Up until recently, where I was at a conference, at a dinner, and one of my colleagues put his hand in my lap, and I thought that was very inappropriate. And I say lap to be, I shouldn't desensitize it, but what he did is he put his hand in my crouch. And then I was thinking to myself, wow, it's been a while. Well, the interesting thing is I touched his hand and just moved it gently, but I left it in, like, on my thigh, in my lap. And I leaned over and I said, we're going to talk about this later. We're going to have those one-on-one conversations with you. And so when Alissa reached out to me and said, hey, be a part of Ampersands, and introduced me to our next speaker, I was elated, because I thought, wow, what an interesting person to have conversations with, which is Kevin. And so I think for me, the basics of me being in this work is to deal with juveniles or children who have experienced sexual abuse. And how do they heal from that trauma through the process of cognitive development, right? Because there are certain things that I missed or didn't grasp educationally or socially because of or I should say that sexual abuse was part of my socialization. And so that's why I love doing this work. And that's why I will always keep up the good fight, and making sure that those voices are also heard for children who experience sex harm and sex crimes. We tend to ignore youth. Even if they're telling you the truth, we usually dismiss it, or you really didn't think it that way. Or it could just be a simple, give grandpa a kiss, and the child goes, no, and I'm a proponent, like, no means no. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to Kevin, and if we have any questions in the Q&A, that would be really good. So hi, Kevin.
Hey Mo, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Happy New Year. I don't think I've seen you in the New Year yet. Hey everyone, my name is Kevin Lynch. I'm coming to you from Minnesota, where I live tonight. I was trying to think about how to introduce myself, and I was looking at the one at the website for One Standard of Justice, and there was a kind of an overreaching point on there, which is that what Cindy's trying to do with that movement is to get fairness for all people convicted of sex crimes. And I'm not one of those people. One of the reasons that we understand that the registry doesn't work is that it gives a pretty false sense of security to a community that we've got all these bad people captured on the registry. And in fact, most of the people who author sexual harm are never charged, never apprehended, never convicted, and they never even find their way to the registry, right? That's a pretty well-established fact. And I'm one of those people. So I'm 66 years old, and in 1978, when I was, I think, 22 or so, I raped a woman who I met at a bar. And I have come to understand that to have been a crime of power and privilege. Not even really a sex crime as I understand it, because I mean, the sex was part of it, but it was more the crime of me feeling that I had the privilege to have the sex that I wanted and the power to get it. It happened quickly and briefly, and never surfaced again after I left that evening, in terms of any contact or any charges or anything like that happened with her. And for, I guess, about 40 years, it sort of bubbled around in my unconscious, and it was a harm to myself in terms of how it affected me emotionally, spiritually, and all sorts of other ways. But, you know, Gary had mentioned that there's various reasons why people who have been harmed haven't come forward in years or decades. And there's also a reason why people who have committed a harm don't come forward. And in simple terms, as I experienced it, and I think as a lot of people experience it, it's because, well, why would you come forward? Because in my case, my power and privilege shielded me from any legal consequences. But there was a major harm to myself and my psyche, and that it just kind of chewed away at me and ate away at me for a long, long time. And in 2016, then candidate Donald Trump, you know, the tapes came out about Donald Trump about a month or so before the election, the Access Hollywood tapes, and everybody was inflamed over this terrible guy and the admissions of this part of how terrible he was. There were a lot of other things actually, but that were terrible about him. But this part came forward, and everybody was rightfully enraged with him. And I had this visceral reaction when it happened, which is to say, geez, I'm just like this guy, because the things that he's been accused of, and I have no doubt that he did them, I've done that. And it hit me like a ton of bricks after sort of chewing me up inside for a long, long time and not knowing what to do about that. And so I ended up writing I was a blog at the time. I was a blogger for the Huffington Post, and I wrote a blog on the Huffington Post. And it was called Just Like Trump, and I identified myself as somebody that had done the same things. And my point was to encourage a conversation among men that you might not have even expected had done things like this, to start to take accountability for it. So I posted the piece, and a lot of things happened after I posted the piece. But one thing that happened that I consider one of the most fortunate things that ever happened in my life was that I got an email in the middle of the night from Alissa Ackerman, Dr. Alissa Ackerman, who I had been, as I had researched how I could get active in this field, I had been encouraged to meet her, and I was planning on reaching out to Alissa, but somehow she found my article on the internet and reached out to me, and we started a conversation. And about a year later, and I wanted to find a way to work in this field, and about a year later, I asked her whether she would help put together a restorative, vicarious restorative justice process for me. And she did, and that day, which was I think in June of 2018, was one of the most powerful days of my life. So I sat with 5 survivors, and we told our stories to each other, and it wasn't so much the story about the particular incidents, but the story about our lives afterwards and what that meant. And it was an incredible experience for me, because I was told that my experience as an author of harm was equally as valid as their experiences as a survivor of harm. And so one thing led to another, and in trying to think when it was now, Alissa, was it 2020 or 2019? But anyway, Alissa invited me to be part of starting Ampersand's Restorative Justice, because I wanted to make an impact in this field, and she thought I might have something to offer, and she thought that starting an organization that approached restorative justice for sexual harm from the perspectives of both an author and a survivor might make sense and make for a powerful proposition for change. So we started Ampersands at that time, and our vision and our mission is a world restored from sexual harm. And the idea is that through training and facilitation and community engagement and amplification activities and so forth, that we can make restorative justice an option that is readily available and readily embraced by anyone who wants to, any survivor who wants to use that as an alternative to the criminal legal system. So that's how I got here, and it's been quite a journey, and quite an experience, and one that for me has allowed me to step into accountability in a way that that I don't think I ever would have been able to do if that hadn't all happened. So I'll stop here.
So I would love, Mo, if you could come back on screen for the two of you to kind of talk with one another about the ways that your stories impact each other.
I think for me, my idea around the conversation with Kevin is so positive, because we have been on the advisory board and working on Ampersands together. But I will say when I was first introduced to Kevin, and I didn't know who he was or coming to this work, and when I did find out, I would say that I have that empathy for a survivor who immediately you feel it in your body at first. And so I was like, ooh, here, even though I've done circles and restorative justice circles with people who've caused harm and have caused crime and developed that community, it was now time for me to do that for myself. And so coming in and meeting Kevin and having that initial reaction, like, ooh, can I do this? Can I move? Do I have enough coping capability in my toolbox of dealing with my traumas to work with someone who has caused sexual harm in a personal space? Because when you're on advisory board and you're going to spend time with someone, you have to have a relationship with them. And after immediately feeling that initial, like, I don't know, and then getting to know Kevin and getting to meet you, I should start saying you because we're talking to each other, it's easier for me now. It is even added to my healing, because it's a space where one I thought I would never get to, meaning that I could actually have a fruitful, blessed, loving relationship with someone in work that we both do, right? So I see you as an advocate, I feel like I'm an advocate, but what I really, really like this dynamic relationship, and I'm hoping as we move along in the advisory board, that we really honestly get to know each other and figure out a way we can, what I say, disrupt the system with a smile. Because you are, when you look at society and the way it's written, you're the top. And I'm absolutely the bottom, you know, meaning as a white male, I'm a Black female woman. And it's just that beyond the sex crime and the harm is that, what can you and I do with that? And so I feel like just having you in this space and getting to know you and working with you is just, it's just adding to the healing, putting another tool in my toolbox for when it's time for me to go out and help someone, or even do more training for myself, or writing, or my research. It really has been, it's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to what we can create in the future.
You're
I know
on
it's
mute,
that
Kevin.
darn mute, it's that darn mute button.
There you go. See, muting myself is not something that comes naturally to me as a straight, white, educated, healthy, abled, cisgendered, English-speaking, American-born male. Muting myself doesn't come easily. But Mo, I was going to say, you amaze me, and have always amazed me with your generosity towards me. Because I mean, when I first put my head above water on this entire thing, and this was in 2016, there was a fair amount of feedback, all of which I deserved, I felt, a fair amount of real negative reaction to me, and, you know, sort of a pariah, and I felt, and I still, I think, feel to a certain degree that I deserved all that. I mean, I'm still coming to terms with actually my own healing and my own being in my space, having done what I've done in terms of making an admission. But when I meet people that are in the field like you, and you're one of the bright energy spots, is that for me to not be received with just disgust or distaste, or to be able to still see me as a human, as opposed to the person who committed what I committed, it's redemptive, and it implies for me the goodness of the world beyond anything that has to do with my own experience. You know, the hard part for me is, or not the hard part, but my continual struggle working in this field is, and you hit it on the head in terms of my position at the top of the hierarchy, and pretty much anybody that I'm working with, unless it's another straight white male with all the other characteristics that I ascribe to myself in terms of privilege, like everyone else is not at that spot on the hierarchy. And I understand that what I did fundamentally was about power and privilege. And so even if I can atone for the crime and the action and the sexual harm, I've still had 66 years of walking around with power and privilege. And so how do I show up into any space at all and not just have the instant, habitual, micro or macro, doesn't matter, but the consistent habitual exercise of my power and privilege in ways that I may not intend, but in the ways that I know rub on the people that I'm with. So I'm really curious, Mo, to know like how and how you encounter that, whether it's in me or in other people who are trying to trying to do something different, but still have that reality?
It's an interesting question because for me, it's always how you show up in the space, right? And so I hear you, and I'm just sitting here thinking, oh, you gotta give yourself some more grace, because that's what I bring to the room when we are together, when we have these conversations, when we're doing this work, is the grace. And I think where you step up just a little bit to the next level, like if you're playing your favorite video game and you go to that next level, is where you have taken what you realize is your privilege and your power and turned it to something, what I say, I don't want to, you've turned it into a protected space. You've taken the space where you've caused harm and protected it by making it a little safer for people, a person like me, to be there, because you recognized the power and the privilege, and you've decided to take that and put it into the healing part of it, where I come across this, and in these spaces is 24/7, right? Because that's their energy. I got to be Black in the United States of America, and I got to be a woman. But the minute I mention that I'm a survivor, of course, it comes into, that's just one more thing to check off. And I was listening to Alissa comments earlier, and she was saying that when we're in this field, as academics in criminal justice and criminology, and I'm actually still boots on the ground. I still volunteer probation. I still work with juvenile sex offenders. I still work with juvenile victims. Whereas when I say I'm a survivor in that space, is completely different if I say it in a space where there are cisgender, hetero, patriarchy, white males in the building. But for me, it's about grace. And I just feel like you've recognized how Brian Stevenson says it best. Each of us is worth way more than the worst thing we've ever done. That's a quote from him in Just Mercy. And I believe that that quote applies to you, right? You just, and you've come to the space. For me, it's like when I feel it and when I hear it, it's like Kevin comes into space because he harmed the space that he harmed at once, but now he just wants to heal and he wants to make it right. And I think you atone well, because you are not like Trump. I hated to hear you say that. I just want to jump out of my skin, because I would never be caught dead in a room with that man, right? Never, ever, because I would fear being harmed by him. But for you, no, it's a different feel. But I honestly believe, I want you to see it from my eyes. I see you taking, and you're learning, you're using the correct language, and it's smooth. It's like it's a part of it's in your DNA now. It's in your vocabulary, it's in your language. And that means a lot to me. It's for me as a survivor, and just even as a street kid, a Black woman, first gen, all of those labels, it's authentic. And that's what counts. You don't happen to be doing this work, you are this work. And for me, that's why, atonement, I think you need to give yourself some grace, because what you're doing in this work is astonishing. And hopefully other men can, whatever their privilege or intersections are, could take notes and definitely come to the space as you have. I don't see atonement. I see humbleness. You're humble.
So somebody recently asked me a question about, so I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but I carry quite a bit of weight, physical weight. And somebody asked me, really trying to understand me, like, what is it like to actually carry that much weight?
Mm.
And so I've been in this space now for a few years, and but the question I would ask you, which is like, what does it actually feel like to you to carry the weight of all the harms that caused you, and then to be with people who, and I don't know if this is entirely in your work or just in your community, but to be with people, not to be, let me just put it more pointedly, to be with men, because I'm not certain that that's where your harm came from, but to be with men that are normalized men in terms of how society sees them, but that may look or feel or give indicators of harm or being harmful. Like, what is it like to be in yourself walking around in that world where there are so many of us?
I don't see it as carrying weight. I try to find, I'm the silver lining kid. Everywhere I go, I have to
I got to spend more time with you, Mo.
Yeah, I do, because otherwise it will drag you down. I feel like the basic of my survival skills is making sure that I show up authentically as myself, so I can automatically get a picture of how you perceive me, and then we move on from there, right? So if I'm walking into the room, first of all, when I walk into the room, I'm the baddest, smartest bitch on the planet. I'm just going to tell you that right now. No one gets better than me, right? I'm like God's favorite. I'm your favorite. I'm everybody in this room's favorite. So, when I walk into a room and I give you that energy, immediately I get one or two kinds, right? I get the guys who are like, oh, just stay away from her because she's crazy, because Mo will tell you how it is. And then I get those who challenge. And it's very rare that I get a few people in my space who want to challenge, like, oh, let's break Mo down because she exudes, strength and power in who she is. But there's also that other flip side where my back is to the door when I'm sitting in a restaurant. I'm hyper visible, hyper head on the swivel when I'm with my daughter and my nieces in public. And it's just, I've learned to take that skill set and just make it part of my fabulousness, right? So I don't see it as a weight. I just see it as a skill set that I've used to stop violence, right? That skill set I've learned to turn on. Like I tell people, I know it's unbelievable, but I can spot a predator without even looking at them, because they just make the hairs on my neck stand up. I was in a church courtyard, and I had been invited to visit, and I was standing there, and all of a sudden my body just went woo, and I was like, predator, like turn around, and I was trying to nail it down. I don't see it as a burden or a weight. I just see it as an extra layer of how to talk to offenders and survivors about creating, I don't like calling it safe spaces, and I'll say I don't call my spaces safe because of being Black in society. Can't walk down the street, can't eat at a restaurant. I got shushed in a bar. Who does that? It's just, so I say protected spaces where I know that the people in that space are working for my protection to make sure that I'm safe. So I'm just that silver lining gal, Kevin. I just don't see it as a burden. It really is about, how do I take the abuse for all of those years? And that's where, I came to grips this year that I am neurodivergent. I do have adult ADHD, which comes into play of how I learn and how I socialize and how I move. But that idea about, even though yes, it was an uncle and later an aunt who sexually abused me, but it was that, what did he train me to do, and how can I turn that into something positive? And I know I get a lot of flack from survivors who are just like, you're crazy. Like, why would you even want to know what an offender thinks, and what can they train you to do next time? But it's a flip on that too. It helps offenders also. And I'm looking for a better word for that too, because I no longer say victim, I say survivor, but I would like to say that we're both survivors from that situation. The one thing about working in the juvenile justice system for so long is I've noticed that my offenders are survivors also, right? And so how do I manage that? But no weights, just how do I change that into, how do I add it to the Moe DNA of making it my authentic self? And it, which turns me to a question to you, is very curious to know, like, are you on edge when I'm in your space? Because I don't want you to be.
Am I on edge?
Like, yeah, like if I'm in your space, because I know that we are culturally different, and I know there's certain ideas about Black people, but that's what I'm curious to know about you. Like, how do you even perceive me in your space and doing this work?
That's a really good question. So I perceive you, and this is true almost always when I'm in a room like this, with a survivor, and I have to think deeply about this, about whether my answer is different for you as a survivor who's a Black woman versus a survivor who's a white woman or a white man or whatever. So I have to kind of think about the race piece of that. I mean, because I mean, if you got all my lineup of privileges, you know, how can I walk through the world and not actually admit that I'm a racist? Because I have to be if I have made it this far as a white man, you know. So, but my first reaction to you is as a survivor, as with any other survivor. I often feel like I defer in a way that puts us into a hierarchy where you're higher on the hierarchy than I am because you've been harmed, and my only harm has been self-harm by this. So I often have I often don't show up with as much of my voice and my good power, because I mean, power is not inherently bad, but I often don't show up with as much of my good power as I could potentially show up with in order to be able to make a bigger difference and a bigger impact, because I'm throttling it down somehow because of our perceived spots in the hierarchy of sexual harm, you know. You know, like in that hierarchy, you're the white man and I'm the Black woman in terms of how I like, in terms of our relative positions, how I feel that, how I experience that. I don't know if that makes, yeah. And so, and I struggle with that. I mean, and, you know, I'm in a business partnership with Alissa, and I struggle with how I show up in that relationship because she's a survivor. We're business partners, but she's also a survivor and I'm an author of harm. And how do I bring all of me to that in an equal partnership, but that I feel that hierarchy. So that's something that's a very real part of my experience. And I'd like to get my arms around that a little bit more, because I think it makes me less effective in the space. Because I'm not, you know, I think about my day job where I'm not, you know, it has nothing to do with sexual harm, and how I bring my power, but in a compassionate way, to lead an organization effectively. And I show up differently in this space. I pull my punches, sort of, in a way. So as far as you being a Black woman, you know, I would never say, well, I don't see color.
Oh, please don't. Please don't do it.
Yeah.
It's the most anti-racist Black thing to say.
No, I know.
It's
So,
like, don't do it.
right. Yeah, because so I don't, you know, I don't do that, but I guess I have to listen even more closely to your experience, because everything that you've experienced, I mean, I've experienced sexual harm as a author of sexual harm, right?
Mhm.
And I've experienced it with white women as the victim of mine. So to experience you, I have to like remind myself, or not even remind myself, but like to be really curious about what the next dimension of that is for you as a result of your race. And then how does that fit into how we relate to each other? Because it's a whole nother level of complexity for me in understanding you. And if I can't understand you, then I can't understand how to partner with you and talk with you and be in a relationship with you.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day, and I was because I was thinking, I was thinking about this conversation we were going to have, and just thinking about well, people always say, oh, you have to bring race into it, and I just it's one of those questions I like to talk about, because unfortunately that's the way the United States is built. I wish I could walk somewhere and not be a Black woman for a change. Although I'm proud to be, it would be nice to just be walking the room and just be accepted like everyone else. It's immediately, a situation where, even where I am at right now, I was standing in the lobby of this wonderful establishment, and it's just, if I don't say a word, I'm ignored, like I'm invisible. But if I open my mouth and it's culturally, there's someone who sounds, and I say that in quote Black, and so therefore I have to deal with why am I now in this space? But that's, for me, the reason why I asked the question is because, usually being in the field, when I was working in probation, working with the white guys, it was just a matter of questioning just my, intelligence and, why are you even in this space? But to now just be a survivor in that space, it's a different punch. And so when you said pull your punches, I was thinking to myself, that's what it is, pulling the punches. But I'm just hoping we'll learn from each other, because I absolutely am elated you're in this space, because I have so much to learn about both sides of a sex crime, because everyone is human. I don't care what you've done. For me, it's second chance. I'm real about second chances. I can't do that. I can't be like, oh yeah, let's give the dog kicker a second chance. Let's give the murderer a second chance. And everyone has to be on the even playing field for me. And so that's why I asked the question is like, how do you feel about this space? And I'm going to be honest. I love the fact that you're working hard to figure it out, because it means you're serious about it. There's some people who, they come to save the day, but they're not about it. They just, I don't know the word for them, but I like that you're working hard at it, because it just shows your dedication and that you really, really, really want to make this a safe space. I mean, sorry, a protected space. And
You just said something that actually really inspired me. And I want to actually clarify something that I said earlier. When I talked about carrying weight, I was actually literally talking about physical weight, being obese. If I'm proud of anything in my life, I'm actually proud that proudest that I've taken this, and I don't carry the weight of my crime with me, because I feel like I've done everything that I can about that. And really, I even did that back when I wrote that article, aside from even working in this field. But what just blew me away, and I just realized something, is that you said you said, I'm proud to be a Black woman. And I don't think I'm proud to be a white man in this country at this time. Because of all the things that, like, I'm proud to be this white man. I'm proud to be me, but I'm not proud to be a white man because of all the things that we stand for and all the as a class of people. Take apart, take out individuals, but just as a group of people, and what we've wrought upon people and upon this country. It's really hard for me to be proud of my demographics, and you're proud of your demographics, and I admire that you're proud, and I'm wistful that I would be proud of my demographics.
And here's me. I hate that that is even an issue, right? We should all be proud of who we are. And it sucks that they make it hard for you, Kevin, because you're awesome. And I want you to be proud of who you are. Your whole self, your whole self, color, it's ethnicity and everything. Right. And that's just what we call that in the Black community. We just call that baby fat, honey. Don't worry about it. Keeps you warm at night.
It does.
It's all about that base. No
I'm
trouble.
in Minnesota, so I need all I can get.
So I think this is a good time to move into Q&A. We have about 20 minutes left. And there are some good questions. The first one comes from our friends of Ampersand's, Johanna Tabari, who asked about having a conversation with the panelists about how we deal with survivor advocates who might be resistant to an RJ framework. So Mo, I'll turn that to you first.
That's wow, have I had some the interesting thing about that question is I've had some violent run-ins about it, right? So how I deal with advocates, we have to agree to disagree, right? Because I don't want to cause further harm in their lives, and I definitely don't want the harm in my life. So I'm just going to be honest, I just don't deal with it. Because it's like that. It's like right now, what's that when you talk to someone, you're not going to change their mind, not wasting your time over there, and move to the resources and the people who actually want to do the work. And so for me, for self-care purposes and for safety reasons, I just don't deal with it, because because I'm beyond my sex crimes, I've even gotten my survivor card taken away from me. You're not a survivor. You're too happy. You're not a survivor. You're thriving in life. And how to just diminish me, because daily, my ADHD is because of my trauma of growing up with sexual harm in my cognitive development. And so I'm gonna be honest, I just don't. We're just gonna have to sit down and go, okay, let's agree to be cordial and nice. You don't agree, I don't agree. We're going to agree to disagree, and we're going to move to our separate corners, because there's that one person, there's always 10 people in line who are on board and really, really want to help. And now remember, I don't do adult cases. Everything I do is 18 and 21 now and under, right? So everything I do is for the youth and young people. So if you really don't want to be there, I can't, because I also cannot put children in harm's way again with the negativity.
And I would add to that, where we are now is not where we were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So, the conversations that I have, I just provide the facts, I just provide the research, and I just keep, bringing those points home. It's why I do the public talks that I do, to kind of elevate, this is what's real. I'm not going to engage in fighting. I will have uncomfortable dialogue with people, and I have, but the research is the research and the facts are the facts. Kevin, there's a question for you. If you can speak more specifically to how you were socialized in a way that led or allowed you to commit the sexual harm that you did? And in the short term afterward, how did you feel about it?
Really, really good question. And there's two parts to that. So, there's a lot of the data talks about perpetrators of harm are often people who are harmed themselves. There's a lot of evidence on that. That was not me at all. No harm committed to me. Grew up in a household that was very Catholic, and if anything around sex, there was a lot of body shame. And my dear father, who just died, was a huge promoter of chastity among his 4 young sons. Didn't work with me, but so I didn't get it from my dad, but I got it from copies of Playboy and Penthouse and Hustler that titillated me, that I consumed heavily. And I wasn't a jock, but I knew that happened a lot in the locker room, and I was kind of bullied by jocks, so I probably had some part of me that wanted to emulate that part. But the short answer was, I think I was just socialized by being a young man in America that glorified athletes and glorified, sex, and glorified celebrities who, glorified Donald Trump. I mean, frankly, I guess maybe I was a little bit before his time, but I was just a young man in America and struggling to understand why my body wanted these things and felt these certain ways. And when I escaped from the control of my parents and was on my own sexually, then I just consumed it. And in this case, I took what I wanted out of power and privilege. The second part was, how did I feel immediately after? Is that the
Yeah.
So I mean, I got out of there as quickly as I could after it happened. I knew at a absolute level that what I had just done was wrong. Things happened, things progressed. She said no, I didn't honor no, I kept going. And within 15 minutes of having completed it, I just knew that this was wrong. And I got out of there, and I tried to, I forgot about it as quickly as I could. I mean, if you can consciously forget something, which seems like a oxymoron, but if you can work hard to forget something, I did that. And I did not want to look at that at all. Immediately. I mean, immediately I wanted to put it in the rearview mirror. It was 1978. I didn't have any fear about getting apprehended or charged. I mean, I probably, in this day and age, maybe I would need to be a little bit more fearful or cover my tracks or anything like that. But I just thought this happened in a bar. I got out of there. I'm done. And I just didn't look back on it. But it did eat away at me for decades after that, because it would bubble up. It would bubble up in strange times where I'm like, "Whoa, what was that?"
Thank you, Kevin. There's another question here about, is the RJ that we're speaking about applied after time is served for the person who perpetrated the harm, or is this something that could be used prior to release? Kevin, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how we've done this at Ampersands? Or
I'm not, well, we've done it a lot of different ways. I'm not sure if the question is about the process that I went through with you, or whether it's, well, maybe the way I'll try to answer it, and maybe bridge back to the other question, the earlier question, about survivor advocates, is to say, at Ampersands, we do work that is survivor centered and survivor requested. So we have not figured out yet how to take a case of a repentant author of harm, because we haven't figured out how to reach out to the survivor without potentially causing more trauma. And I think that we wish that we could crack that code about how to do that, but we haven't. So we take cases that are, and the exception would be vicarious restorative justice. So there's cases with survivors who either don't have the ability to have contact with the person who harmed them, or are afraid to do that. And in those cases, I sit in as the proxy author of harm in that case. But in most cases, it's a survivor who seeks restorative justice. And then our work begins with, okay, then getting to the author of the harm and bringing that person into the loop. And we've actually, we do work in training, and at least one, maybe more, but at least one of the men who have been in our trainings have now actually been able to serve as a proxy in a restorative justice process. So this is all about building capacity of the system to take on more cases. So if we get more people who can engage in the linear time that it takes to do a case, then we can make more impact.
We can work with people after they've served time. We tend not to take cases that are currently winding their way through the criminal legal system. I have done work in prisons with people who are currently incarcerated. So there's many different ways to do it. Moe, can you speak to how this works with juveniles?
With juveniles, it's always while they're in custody. As a lot of folk probably know or don't know, that juveniles are not stigmatized as criminal, they are delinquent. And so since they are given a much what I call a rehabilitation and recovery label, no other way to put it, yes, it's in-house. And normally it's through proxy, it's vicarious also, because they're some of the victims are juvenile themselves. And so in the state of California, you have to be very careful legally about how you handle a survivor of sexual harm, because it's a welfare case on their part, but on the it's the delinquent case of the person who caused harm part. So it's a very legalistic, but it is in-house, and the way we normally do that is through a surrogate also, and sometimes in group, because these are circles, and they put all the juvenile authors of harm together in a group, and they walk through that. To me, that's also restorative justice process, is when you get them to recognize the harm and want to change, and to, they all have to write the letter. That's what I say. They all have to write the letter, which means that you have to write to your victim. And in the last case that I worked, he was actually able to do a face-to-face with his survivor, because the survivor turned 18. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to reach in and say, can we now have this conversation? And that was the first time that I had ever witnessed it, being outside outside of the juvenile legal system, because there's so many layers there for juveniles. But yes, it's mostly while they're in custody, done vicariously, and it's done in a group circle. And the way I see it is if we could get them to recognize the harm and want to and write the letter to whatever they do in that letter, because we don't read them, we let them keep, we seal them and put them in their file for if they are released, then they get it back. But whatever they decide to do, which is as an apology or an atonement or restitution or whatever that is in that letter, is what we see as also restorative justice.
What's the age of the surrogate, Mo?
It's always a counselor. Always a counselor.
So an adult surrogate.
Yeah, it's always an adult, always a counselor or a VIP like myself. I am because I am a survivor, and that my harm was when I was a juvenile. I feel like I relate better because of my harm being a juvenile. Like I feel like that part of my brain is stuck there. I don't know how to say that because I am a professor. I'm very intelligent, but there's a part of me that can relate when I'm sitting down with a lot of juveniles and they start talking. I'm them. So the surrogate is usually an adult, always an adult, because it's complicated to, because the juvenile legal system is, protect best interest of the child, so so that was the first time it happened outside. And it happened because the one he's now serving time. And so when he got moved from juvenile to adult, that's when his survivor reached out and said, can we have this conversation? And they allowed it. I thought, go ahead, Orange County. It was pretty good. It was really good. And the only reason why I was involved is because I was his VIP that sat with him for 3 years while he walked through this process of whether or not he was going to be found unfit for juvenile. And unfortunately, to me, it's unfortunate when you go to the criminal legal system because they're not about rehabilitation and restorative justice or even recovery as the juvenile legal system is.
So we're coming up to the end of our time.
Wow, that went by fast.
Very fast. So famous last words, Moe, Kevin, and then Cindy, if you want to come back on.
I don't know about famous, but for survivors, public and not, and people who have caused harm, public and not, each of us is worth more than the worst thing that we've ever done or has ever happened to us. And I'm putting a little spin on Brian Stevenson's quote.
Kevin?
I have two of them, if that's okay. The first one is, for authors of harm, accountability is freedom. Absolutely, it's freedom. And for the rest of the world, Mo is a badass of grace.
Cindy?
All right. I have a quote here that I think is very appropriate based on a couple of things that were said. And I don't know if this echoes something Mo said or Mo and Alissa, but Mo, you can't reason someone out of a position that they weren't reasoned into. And, that's all I'm going to say. I mean, Alissa has been on this journey with me since 2018. We've had a lot of barriers in the state of Connecticut with the advocates in terms of even having a conversation. And so we look forward to sort of coming in the middle someday. No convo, no change. Right? So Mo, you gave me good advice, actually. You and Alissa on that score. So I just wanted to thank everybody. And we all will be back again someday.
You asked at the beginning, Cindy, about the 2nd anniversary. Count me in. I'll see you all in a year.
And Alissa, that Carl Hansen webinar with you, Gary, and Carl, I mean, that's got to be an anniversary meeting. That would. All right. Well, anyway, thank y'all.
Thanks for the invitation, Cindy.
Good night, everybody.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yep.
Good night.